The lever. I think I was given a ritual doll by accident. The scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life happened during last year's spring break. I know it must have been the spring break because Daniel's birthday is usually around that time. For a long time, Daniel had been speaking about his birthday and how great it would be. And while I'd rather be enjoying Invincible or Squid Game at home, I knew that I had to go to his party since he had been so excited about it. The clouds were grey in the sky on that day, and I'd left school in a rush. I had to go buy Daniel a present before heading to his party, and so I had to leave early so my mother would be able to pick me up before she went to work. At the mall, we looked around into as many shops as we could, but we couldn't seem to get any drawing pads for Dan. But finally, in our desperation, we walked into this rather questionable shop. It was small and tucked in the corner of the mall. The lights weren't working, and the rows were filled with strangely shaped glasses. I was staring at a creepy glass figure with a massive head and angry eyes when I felt a knife cut my shoulder. I jumped back and turned to see that it was an elderly lady, and what had stabbed my shoulder was her long nail. She had a black mole under her nose, and her eyes seemed annoyed at us. Well, we didn't want to be there for long either, so we briskly told her what we wanted. She walked off, as if going to get the pad, but when she returned, she was holding a doll. I was so confused as she put the doll in my hands. Not wanting to cause any more trouble, my mother thanked her and hurried out. She told me I could throw the doll away, but I guess I didn't. A lot happened after that. We found the drawing pad, we went to the party, my mother went to work, and her tire popped while she was on the highway coming home, so my dad had to borrow one of our neighbor's cars and go to her. So I'd completely forgotten about that stupid doll, and that's when it happened. The time was around 6 p.m. I was watching TV when I heard a rather hard knocking sound from the door down the hallway. By then, it had been raining rather hard outside, and so while I was creeped out by the sound, I wasn't sure whether what I was hearing was real or not. After a minute, the sound didn't come again, so I went back to watching TV. But then, there was another knocking sound. This time it was softer than the last one, but it was far more insistent. At this point, I was more than creeped out and was thinking of calling my father. But before doing that, I decided to peek and see what was down the hallway. I got up and walked to the hallway. It was dark down the hallway, the only light coming from the windows above the door, and so I could see her. An old shriveled woman with a huge smile showing her missing teeth. Her hair was wild and pointing in all directions, while she seemed to be breathing hard. But the creepiest part had to be the fact that she was actually crying. Tears fell down her face. At the sight of me, she opened her smiling mouth and let out a sound that sounded like a train. I must have been screaming too, but I only moved when the woman dashed towards me. I jumped out of the way and behind the wall, but she didn't appear. Instead, I heard footsteps running up the stairs. As I frantically tried to call my dad, the woman's footsteps returned, and I looked around the wall. But she only opened the door, turned to snare at me, calling me a murderer in a shaky voice, and then she ran out. And in her hand, she'd been holding that damn doll, which I'd left in my room upstairs. And that was the last of it. The questioner. A haunted lady wished to give me her haunted present. I've been working at a nursing home for years now, for a number of reasons. I could have afforded to go to college and study to be a doctor, as I'd planned to do when I was a kid, but I chose the nursing home. The reason is, I really like helping people who I feel are abandoned, and that is what the nursing home is, a place full of abandoned people. However, if I am entirely honest, there are instances where I wonder if this was a good decision. First of all, I am one of the few guys working here, which really nags at me often. Secondly, I wouldn't say the pay here is that great. But third, and most importantly, I question whether it was a good idea to work here. Because of the lady I met some time ago, Lady Brighton. So before I was even born, my mother and father had a child. The boy grew up and he passed away before I was even conceived. I've never told anyone, but before I'd even heard about this, I used to have dreams. In these dreams, I met a boy. Sometimes he'd give me advice, sometimes he'd play with me, and sometimes he'd warn me. I believe this boy is my brother. He visited me a few days after I first met Lady Brighton, and he told me that I should be careful of a black ball coming my way. Suffice to say, I didn't heed his warning. Lady Brighton arrived at the nursing home before I'd even started working there. I just never had the chance to meet her until much later. When I saw her at first, I thought she was visiting. She didn't look like most of the people in the nursing home. You see, she had hair striped with black lines and would often wear floral dresses. She could take care of herself for the most part and seemed very cognitively aware. And when she first met me, she seemed to immediately take a liking to me. She'd talk for hours with me and try to keep me all to herself. And so, you can imagine how I never could have expected what happened next to have come from her. On that day, it was a grey morning, and by then, I'd forgotten completely about my brother's message. Instead, when I arrived at work, I was fairly conversational and relaxed. When I made it to Lady Brighton, she was sitting on her chair, and her eyes seemed, well, off. She was just staring out of the window, holding in her hand a cup of coffee that had gotten cold by then. When I first saw her, I thought her age must have finally caught up to her. But then she turned her head and saw me standing there, and a smile spread upon her face. It wasn't the same smile I'd seen before. It felt like she wasn't actually looking at me, but was actually seeing someone in my place. I greeted her and asked her how she was. I asked her if she wanted fresh coffee. I even asked her if I should close the windows for her. But each question, she didn't respond. Instead, she merely hummed at the end. Then she looked to the table in front of her. There was a doll, made from wood, with hay hair. She picked it up and gave it to me. I'd been confused by her behavior, but when I touched that doll, I swear, it felt like everything suddenly made sense. First, my stomach felt like it was trying to kick its way out of me and up my throat. Then, it was as if there were ants walking all over my skin. Finally, my heart clenched violently and I could have sworn I was having a heart attack. I still don't believe it, even as I'm about to write it. But it's just the truth. I don't doubt it, and if you think I'm stupid, then it's fine. Think what you want, but I don't doubt it. That doll was possessed by something terrible. It was possessed by something evil. I quickly rushed out of the room and threw the doll on the receptionist's table. I told her to never let Lady Brighton near it again. I couldn't explain to her why, and she felt like I was overreacting. Lady Brighton has passed on now. About a week ago, Sandy pulled me aside to show me something. It was Lady Brighton's picture book. The picture was full of her old grey family pictures. who looked like her, some who didn't at all. One who was clearly her as a child. It was her family. They had one thing in common. They were all deceased now. And as Sandy pointed out to me, in each of those pictures, there was the doll, smiling at the camera. The tosser. I witnessed the demon possession. I am in college, but my parents can't afford to pay for my entire education fees, so I usually go to my uncle's house to help him with his business to make some money for myself. My uncle is a contractor, and working with him usually means we do construction work, which, won't lie, is the most physically taxing work I have ever had to do in my little Gen Z life. But at least I get to hang out with my little cousin. My little cousin is a sweet girl, and her father doesn't let her have friends, so I usually enjoy getting to play with her when I have the chance. I really do love her, and it hurts me whenever she's hurt, so you can only imagine how I felt when she suddenly fell ill. No matter what we fed her, and no matter which hospital we took her to, no one could pick up what was making her sick, but it was very clear that she was in fact falling ill. She was having headaches for hours, and she even vomits sometimes. Also, she says her stomach aches, and she has trouble walking around. As a result, she would miss days worth of work at school because she'd spend those days trying to recover at home. One time, I was walking past her room and I heard her sniffling in her room. She was crying from the pain. I'd never felt more useless or angrier in my life. But just as it seemed this was getting worse, she suddenly got a whole lot better. My uncle had decided to take her to school once, just to get her to stop crying. And so she did. We had waited anxiously, expecting to get a call from school that she had fallen in class or something. But no, she came back that day more energetic than we'd ever seen her in a long time. And so we started taking her to school again. However, school couldn't last forever. And so the school breaks hit, and I had to stay over for the breaks. But as I was staying there, I watched as she sank back into her previous ill state, and now it was worse, because she started getting violent and angrily throwing things around the room and yelling at me. And at night, I could hear her whispering, "Lacey May Lynn." Finally, I decided I'd walk into her room one night, and I couldn't help noticing that she slept with this doll tucked against her face. It had a purple face and a massive grin on it, and she held on to it as if holding on for dear life, and she whispered, calling it Lacey. Schools opened again, and when she was gone to school, she behaved normally again. And one weekend, I went to visit, and she was back to her tempers. But this time, as she was yelling at me, I looked into her eyes, and finally, I saw it. Those eyes just weren't hers anymore. Her parents thought the same too, and were talking about how the air must have affected her. Something about seasons. But I wouldn't buy it. So I went to her room when she was gone, and I tossed out that doll. Till today, we haven't had another episode again, and I'm telling you, there are dark powers in our world. The follower. My mother bought my little brother an ugly doll that is definitely alive. About a month ago, it was my baby brother's birthday. The kid was turning 3, and so my mother felt he was ready for more than just clothes for presents. I got him some sweets, and my mom got him a doll, probably the ugliest doll I'd ever seen in my life. It was supposed to be some kind of humanoid dog, but its eyes bulged out too much, and its teeth were very sharp. Also, I think it had wooden hands and legs. And my mother thought this was supposed to be cute. I genuinely can't tell you what goes through my mother's head sometimes. Anyway, surprising to absolutely no one but my mother, the boy hated it. He cried and screamed, trying to get away from the monster, and I would have joined him too if it meant she'd throw the doll away. Luckily, she did. She got up and left the room with the doll. Then she came back to open more presents for the kid, but the doll wasn't with her anymore. So I forgot about the monstrosity until a few days later. It was night by then, and I was sitting on the couch and fiddling with my guitar when I suddenly heard it. A loud blowing wind that blew so hard I could have sworn the house started to shake a bit. I thought that was strange, but not much more than that. It was late in the night, so I couldn't tell if the night had clouds or not. And so I went back to tweaking my guitar. But then, there was a loud rattling wind, and this time, I heard it. What sounded like a baby crying in that wind. I looked around, wondering how that was possible. My father had gone with the boy, and my mother was supposed to be sleeping. But the more I listened, the more unquestionable it became. There was some kind of baby crying in our house. I placed the guitar down slowly, so as to not disrupt the sound, and I followed it. The sound led me upstairs. It got louder and louder the more I walked, and soon I could hear that there was also something accompanying the sound, a knocking sound. And finally, I came to stop right under the attic door. The knocking and the crying baby was coming right above me. It took a lot of work to finally reach the attic, and when I finally opened the door, the crying stopped immediately. I peeked my head inside, and my eyes immediately connected with dead plastic eyes. The door. There were boxes in the attic, with dust and cobwebs all over the place, but the doll was what held my attention. I knew right then and there that I had to get rid of that thing. Ever since I've thrown out that door, I haven't heard any weird noises coming from the house.